See, I think that when I said that the pandemic is a portal, I didn't necessarily mean that it's a portal that will lead to a better world. I meant that it's a portal through which we will pass, and the world will change depending on the choices we make. It could be a much bleaker world, and all the people in power are doing everything possible to make that the case. I would like to live in that world where the fiction is more real than the real world, because that's what you choose to elevate. That's what you choose to prioritize. We have to live while we're alive. We cannot be entombed. We cannot be, we mustn't allow our minds to be caged in fear. We have to find a way to deal with what is being done to us.
Hello readers, my name is Grzegorz Jankowicz and I serve as program director of the Conrad Festival. This is a second interview from our monthly series of additional events through which we contextualize ideas and problems of this year's edition of Conrad. We reflect upon the nature of the future. My guest today is Arundhati Roy. She is an Indian writer and author of many stories published in books marked as fiction and non-fiction. But in case of her writing, this distinction does not make much sense. Fiction and non-fiction are two modes of literature for Arundhati. As John Berger once wrote, they are two legs on which Arundhati Roy walks through the world, describing, in a critical way, destructive consequences of power. Hello, Arundhati, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Let me start with questions about current situation in India. Last year, in April, you wrote a text for Financial Times in which you described pandemic as a portal through which we need to get to the future world different than the one in which we lived before COVID-19. It seems that our past mistakes, our systemic disaster, the disaster we brought to different places of the world, stops us in this portal. In India, the situation is numbing, as you wrote to me in one of your emails, due to another wave of COVID-19 and additional problems like, for example, mycorrhizasis spreading around.
See, I think that, when I said that the pandemic is a portal, I didn't necessarily mean that it's a portal that will lead to a better world. I meant that it's a portal through which we will pass, and the world will change depending on the choices we make. It could be a much bleaker world, and all the people in power are doing everything possible to make that the case, and not a world in which human beings, I think, who have been through these lockdowns and who have really come face to face with anguish and death. There are many people who are questioning the values that were sort of beamed down at us from, various international media and the kind of brainwashing that we are all subject to. But on the other hand, we are now in a world where the whole population of this planet has had to submit to a kind, because of the illness, to a kind of authoritarianism where we are used to being locked down, released, locked down, told what to do, how to think, ruled by, so many things that we don't fully understand. Now, this is something that the virus enforced but it's something that governments and people in power are going to seize and use whether or not there's a virus, a new regime of control and surveillance and so on. In India, I find it, even though I'm a writer, it's hard for me to even begin to explain what's going on, because what generally is reported is that the system has failed, or the government, has been caught unawares. It's being reported as though there's a virus that has overwhelmed, systems. In truth, the systems were dismantled before the virus came, and the virus has spread over the ruins of what ought to have been some kind of net into which vulnerable human beings can fall. But that net was removed, before there was ever a virus. So I'll give you a few examples of that. I mean, probably you know that we live under a prime minister whose whole aim has been to declare India a Hindu nation, who belongs to an organization who has long wanted to dismantle the Indian constitution, to bring this very diverse continent that is pretending to be a nation, a continent with hundreds of languages and thousands of dialects and hundreds of different kinds of religion, into Hindi, one language, Hindu, one religion, one election, one tax. It's like trying to put a whole ocean into a bottle. That is the imagination of the state. And over the last decades, since the early 90s, when India opened its markets to global finance, systematically, everything, private infrastructure, public infrastructure, has been dismantled. So for us, as a small example, India at one time was one of the biggest manufacturers of vaccine serum in the world. We had 7 public sector institutions manufacturing serum. Privatization meant the dismantling of them all. And just the coronavirus, for example, the corona vaccine was given to 2 private institutions. And even their orders were not placed. So we are now at the height of a pandemic with no vaccines, almost no vaccines. Less than 3% of the population has been vaccinated. You had a very rudimentary healthcare system, public healthcare system, which over the years has been undermined, so that you have a massive country like India where 1.25% of the GDP is spent on health, and health has been totally privatized. In rural areas where people like children are dying of diarrhea, of small things which can be sorted out with a little access to not even medicine, but just clean water, now are overwhelmed by coronavirus. And there's no hospitals, there's no healthcare, there's no tests, there's no oxygen, So the calamity that overcame a city like Delhi, the capital of India, where whether you were a former diplomat or whether you were a poor person on the road, it didn't matter. You were not getting oxygen. Hospitals had, just 25, 35 people dying overnight because there was no oxygen. And now that whole trauma has gone into the rural areas where there's nothing. There's no medicines, there's no doctors, there's no statistics. And even to suppress and manipulate statistics at the height of a pandemic is a crime.
Some people, not only politicians, say that to bring changes to the world, we need to survive COVID pandemic first. But to overcome the current situation and to survive, we need structural changes now, not in the future. The changes are necessary at this very moment.
See, I think that when people who say things like that, they mean that a few people should survive the pandemic. They don't mean that humanity should survive the pandemic. But I'm saying that if we want humanity to survive, then what are the basic things we have to accept? The basic things we have to accept are that everybody has the right to health. Everybody has the right to a vaccination, if that is the solution if that is the inoculation against this pandemic, So you can't have a situation where corporations seeking profit are in charge of this entire regime of vaccinating. If you're going to say that, oh, we have patents over this and we are going to oversee it and make massive profits out of it, because we have seen that doesn't work. In a poor country like India, unless you have public health care, the bulk of the population is going to fall through the cracks. There's just no doubt about it, So and the other thing that's happened in India is that because we have a government that is anti-science, a government that has promoted cow urine and cow dung and yoga gurus and all kinds of quacks, then you have those people, first of all, publicizing the fact that, oh, if you rub yourself in cow dung or if you drink cow urine, you won't get corona. You have people whom the Prime Minister has patronized, openly denigrating, allopathic medicines and allopathic doctors. Then you have allopathic doctors themselves making the most ridiculous prescriptions. Like now you spoke about the black fungus, the muco, whatever that word is. I can never get it right. But it's clear that a lot of the cause of that is because people have been prescribing steroids when steroids should not be prescribed, prescribing steroids as prophylactics. You have this drug called remdesivir, which is, you have stadiums full of people waiting and rioting to get it when it doesn't serve any purpose, And then you have, I was reading some really strange study where the people who had, the spurious remdesivir were better off than those who had the real one because it doesn't help, right? So a whole regime of mixed messaging, of, underneath it, this authoritarian government that arrests people. There were people being arrested for asking for oxygen on Twitter because it makes the government look bad. Today there were doctors arrested because they met the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh with a petition for some demands for the conditions under which they work. They were arrested. So you have a pandemic which is taking people down. You have no oxygen. You have an authoritarian government who's only concerned about its image, and its only reaction is either to come out with Hindu nationalism and denigrate other minorities, as they did in the first round when they call it Corona Jihad and they said Muslims are spreading it and so on. So under this, I don't know how and who is going to survive, In
many of your essays, you write that we should refine a different type of politics of resistance, which will force all of us to be responsible, to act in a responsible way. I believe that this is an ongoing project of humanity, important not only for the humankind, but it looks like now, like today, we need stronger tools.
Well, see, that would have been that. I mean, I've said that in many ways, in many essays. And, that was when I was talking about the exploitation of forests and mountains and the privatization of rivers and the, taking over of indigenous lands and the fight against big dams and so on. But in this situation that we are now in, what is resistance? Like the people that are in power have locked down the cities, they've locked down people, they are promoting sort of voodoo science, they control resistance is not enough now. These kinds of states have to be replaced. They have to be in whatever way we can, whether it's by writing, exposing them, working with people or whatever. There's no hope left with a government like the one that India has now, because it's not a government. I just wrote a piece called "We Need a Government." We don't have one, because the only thing they know is how to spread hatred, how to pit people against each other, you had a meeting, this was before coronavirus and so on, you had a meeting of the National Science Congress, I think it was, where scientists are so terrified. They come out and say things like, there are no longer any magnetic waves, there are only Modi waves. You had Modi, the Prime Minister of India, addressing a gathering of medical people, and this is before coronavirus, saying, Hindus discovered plastic surgery because how else would we have had Ganesha, a man with an elephant's head? So we are in a situation where resistance is just not enough. I'm just speaking about India. This configuration is a danger to the world. It's a danger to the world. You have 1.2 billion people here and a virus running rampant.
In your opinion, once expressed, India exhausted its share of superheroes. I guess it applies to the rest of the world as much as it applies to India. Now we have only small heroes, and we should focus on them, supporting their actions as much as possible. These are your words from the essay I just quoted. These lines came to me when I visited a hospital where people are treated for COVID-19 in Poland. The small heroes were all around doing their best and yet losing the fight, at least at that time.
See that, Gregor, that line, I remember it. It was written, I think, in my 1999 essay called The Greater Common Good, it was about the struggle against big dams. And I was talking about enough of these huge dams and huge things. We need to scale down, Unfortunately, India is in the process of generating these, they are not heroes, nor they are superheroes, but they are these crazy authoritarian figures like Modi, who has never held a press conference in his entire 7-year career as Indian Prime Minister. He's never answered anybody's questions. When he meets chief ministers of the states, he turns them into idiots because they are not allowed to speak. Only he is allowed to speak. So it's a crazy situation. And yes, there are so many people in India, whether it's nurses, whether it's doctors, whether it's private citizens, just doing everything they can to feed the millions of people who have lost their jobs, who last year had to walk thousands of miles home because Modi called the lockdown with 4 hours notice. And you had the people who are migrated from the villages to work in cities, trapped in the cities without food, without lodging, without money, and without transport. And they had to walk thousands of miles home, And you had private people, NGOs, stepping out, doing their best to help. But that help is nothing. In a situation where a nation is in a crisis like this, that help is nothing. It makes us feel good. If I help to feed 500 people, or if I support, whatever I can, I do, but it's nothing. I should not think of it as anything other than something that makes me feel personally happy that I'm contributing. But the scale of this emergency chaos cannot be addressed by this kind of thing. It can only be addressed by having a government in place. It cannot, these are all toy things for them, like how much can you do when you have millions of jobs lost? Right now, I was telling somebody that what it feels like is like there's a low fog that has spread across the land, dense fog. Through the fog, we can hear cries of anguish, of people dying, of people needing things, of people suffering. But only when the fog lifts will we know the contours of the havoc it has caused. It's havoc because it's not just about people who had COVID and people who died. It's also about millions of people who were surviving on nothing, daily wage workers. How are they eating? Last time in the lockdown, they had the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which gave them something. Now those workers can't work because they're dying. 1,600 school teachers who were forced to go on election duty in the state of Uttar Pradesh have died of COVID. And then their families, how many of their members of their family must have died too? Like private initiatives are nice, but charity is just a small thing. It's nothing. It's about the giver. It's about trying, individual people trying, but it obscures the fact of the massive epic tragedy that's going on here.
How is it possible that during such crisis, when governments fail, I use plural because it happens elsewhere too, not only in India. So how is it possible that during such crisis, when governments fail, there are people dramatically affected by mistakes of those in power, but still supporting this power? It looks like we need to change not only the governments, but also our imagination. You wrote that to bring new future, we must stop eliminating people who have a different imagination, a different worldview. Governments try to eliminate such people in many ways. You were called anti-national for your criticism of the government. Your reply was that criticism of the government is not anti-national, but anti-nationalist. How to protect oneself from that kind of manipulation?
See, when you fight, you don't protect yourself, right? Right now in India, the best lawyers, the best activists, trade unionists, professors, teachers, they are in jail. You have in the midst of this pandemic, the government changed 3 farm laws, which basically corporatized agriculture and brought millions of farmers out on the streets. And even through COVID, they're sitting physically distant on the borders of Delhi because the ground has been taken away from under their feet. So we can't protect ourselves from these insults. The problem you brought up is actually a very serious one, which is that you have a chemical equation that these people in power have found, where your own survival and your own well-being matters less to you than the hatred for somebody else, and anytime there's a problem, they manage to create a situation which turns into a battle between castes or between communities. And the odd thing is in India, which calls itself the world's biggest democracy, almost every election is preceded by a massacre of Muslims to polarize the vote, So right now we are thinking the government has disappeared. Modi has disappeared. The Home Minister has disappeared. The people who are on TV every day have disappeared. What are they planning? Where is the next so-called terrorist attack or war or something going to come from to distract us from our own grief, our own loss, our own economic devastation, And it's a psychological game that they understand very well. And I don't know what the antidote to that is. Because right now, as we speak, they have suffered a huge election loss in West Bengal. It's the first time Modi has lost an election where he himself personally put himself out, since 2002, when he appeared on the political stage as the chief minister of Gujarat. And within months, there was a massacre where thousands of Muslims were slaughtered on the streets and the metropolitan cities of Gujarat. And from then onwards, he became what they call the Hindu Hriday Samrat, the emperor of Hindu hearts. And since then, he's never lost an election. But last month, he lost very, very badly in the state of West Bengal. So now the only thing they can do is to crank up that Hindu feeling again. And will that Hindu feeling then fog the anguish of people who've lost their fathers and mothers and children and grandparents? I don't know. But it has been known to happen in the world,
After reading your texts, your stories, as you refer to them, I have realized that each time our governments initiate a war against something or someone, the rich ones try to take control over the situation and benefit from it. You give an example of militarized vocabulary with which certain governments and institutions have started to address the climate change. You wrote these words: calls for a climate emergency, although well-meaning, could hasten the process that has already begun. The pressure is already on to move the debate from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to United Nations Security Council. In other words, to exclude most of the world and place decision-making straight back into the den of the same old suspects.
The same thing is happening now. Yeah, no, the same thing is happening now with COVID. You will see that the debates are becoming control-oriented, surveillance-oriented, data-oriented, so vaccine passports. So once again, you'll see power back in the hands of people who will then decide who can travel, who can't travel, who will have control over the reins of the vaccine, who will make money from it, who will have all the data, who will control humanity. It's becoming almost like some bad James Bond film, like the guys who control, who sit in a control room and who have everything at their fingertips, and then will decide who lives, who dies, who travels, who profits. I mean, unfortunately, that portal that I spoke of, all the signs are that we are dragging the carcasses of everything wrong through that portal, and increasing the burners on everything, which is exactly what we should be questioning, So it will be a portal, but it will be a portal to a very, very dark surveillance super state. If those of us who think it should be otherwise are ineffective, and it's hard to be effective, even here in India. If you look at I don't think there's any country in the world that has as much news saturation. You have like hundreds of 24-hour news channels in every language, each of them owned by corporations who have profited hugely from the pandemic, hugely. They have made billions with this lockdown and the pandemic. And now they control the media. You have the big social media giants who are very keen to please India because it offers a huge market, except that market can crash if people don't have anything to spend or buy or, on.
Let me quote your words. So as we lurch into the future, in this blitzkrieg of idiocy, Facebook likes, fascist marches, fake news queues, and what looks like a race toward extinction, what is literature's place? What counts as literature? How to be a writer in these times? You asked these questions before pandemic, and you answered them. I want to put them again. How to be a writer in the midst of pandemic?
Well, this is what I'm trying to do, This is what one, to understand how to pull all the threads together of what are happening, and that you just can't carry on writing as though the world hasn't changed, as though our imaginations are not being colonized, as though all we want is for the lockdown to end and us to drop our masks and everything will be the same again. It can't be, So how do you understand that in your imagination, in your poetic imagination? I was recently being asked by somebody, a current affairs sort of online good news channel, good news portal here. Only a few online portals are still challenging the status quo, to do an interview. And I said, what do you want me to say at a time when the crisis is so huge? I'm not going to come and have a current affairs conversation. You need the literary voice, the poetic voice, the howl of rage. I'm not going to sit there and just dispute what Modi said today or yesterday or what the Home Minister did or didn't do, because the crisis is at a stage now where we've got to understand that these people have to go. They have to go. That's all there is to be said now,
You like the idea of...
That was not a proper answer to your question. The answer to your question is that you have to find the literary voice, the poetic voice, and the voice of a writer who does not accept what the czars of literature and publishing, who sit in their comfortable worlds, decide is literature. It's not that. We are dealing with a bloody fire on the ground, with corpses being pulled out by dogs, and it's a imagination which is different now. Like when someone says, what is a crime against humanity? It's not the Second World War, it's not the Holocaust, but it's the structural dismantling of everything that is a little bit of security for the poorest people in the world who are falling into an abyss. So you don't have to go out and kill them, but you create conditions for them to just die. You take away the oxygen from their lungs, and then you say, oh, like it just happened. It didn't just happen. You caused it, People here are not dying because they cannot, because the virus itself is killing them. The dismantling of a system is killing them.
it is very difficult to talk about other topics when things like that are happening. I'm very sorry for India and people there. I think that literature can do a lot of good things during such a crisis. I like your idea of literature as shelter of all kinds. It is touching to hear you talking about your characters as though they were alive. You say that you protect them, but they protect you. There is a unique exchange between you, your characters, and your readers, because the latter, they also feel that they are protected by your characters.
Yes, I mean, I think that even if they are fictional characters, or even if they are people created in the laboratory of one's mind, you know, when the fiction comes into the world, those people become real, you know. So for me, it's somebody recently asked me, you know, about how about that old, you know, World Social Forum slogan about another world is possible. And so I said, in fiction, the thing is that you know that that other world exists. It exists in people's relationships. It exists in the imagination. It exists in the ways in which people understand each other differently from what the world is conditioned to see, you know, whether it's sexuality, whether it's caste, whether it's family. There is such unexpectedness in the world, which the writer of fiction or literature sees and actualizes, you know. So I would like to live in that world where the fiction is more real than the real world, because that's what you choose to elevate, you know, that's what you choose to prioritize, or that's how you choose to see. Just in the way we were talking earlier of the fact that private individuals come out and show their best side during the pandemic. They do that all the time in real life too. It's a question of what is it that you would like to see there, you know? And so, and also, what is it that people like to unsee? What is it that people like to not notice? What are the violences that people in India, powerful people, you know, privileged caste people like to pretend is not happening here, forgetting about the pandemic, but otherwise, you know, what is it that's going on in Kashmir that Indians would like to pretend is not happening? Fiction can bring those worlds onto the table. So it can give some people shelter, and it can rip the roof off other people's heads, you know, and put them out into the storm as well, you know.
In Come September, you wrote that writers imagine they cull stories from the world, but you believe that vanity makes them think so. It's actually the other way around. Stories cull writers from the world. What do you mean by that? That stories are looking for a writer?
What I mean by that is, you know, we can't always choose the circumstances into which we are born, how we live, what experiences we have. So it's a vanity to think that you are some kind of person who just sits at a desk and constructs a story, you know. So much of who you are and what you are is beyond your control. And I certainly, you know, so often when somebody asks me, how's the writing going? And I say, I don't write, I just wait. And something comes and whispers in my ear or punches me, you know. So it's a sort of shamanistic process in some ways, you know. Even when you even when I write the political essays or the nonfiction essays, quite often I try not to write them because I get into trouble when I write them. It's, it's not quite often something that is the first thing I want to do. But then you just can't hold it in anymore, right? Because you're seeing things in a way, perhaps from the point of view of a storyteller, that is different from the point of view of an academic or a journalist or an NGO or an activist. You're seeing the story, the narrative, whether it's the story of the dam or whether it's the story of anything. I mean, it's like you quoted from the Greater Common Good, the essay that I wrote about the big dams being built in the Narmada. And 20 years later, when I wrote I think 10 days ago in The Guardian, the piece about the corona virus story right now, one of the points was about this person that I knew called Prabhu Bhai, who lived in a village which was the first village to be displaced, indigenous people's village to be displaced when this huge dam was being built decades ago. And these people were pushed off their lands and they live around the dam builders colony. And those big people now, live on the land and these people work as servants in the land which was theirs once, right? They have to steal the fruit from the trees which were theirs once. And Prabhu Bhai, for so many years, for 30 years, fought against this big dam. And he died of corona a few weeks ago. There was no hospital where he lived. All there was Modi's Statue of Unity, built with millions of dollars, a statue of Sardar Patel, the highest statue in the world, where you have to take a lift up one of the legs and you can go and view the whole dam from somewhere near the heart, And so you just see the narrative tragedy of it. You see that as a novelist somehow, who has followed these things for so long and who's got these layers inside of you, these incredible stories that tell you in a minute the story of the last, half a decade in India. It's prior.
When I was preparing myself for this interview and when I was thinking about India now in the pandemic, I recalled words from your first essay, the one about bomb. You described your conversation with a friend who asked you about your plans and dreams after the Booker Prize for the God of Small Things. And you answered that the only dream worth having is to dream that you will live while you are alive and die only when you are dead. Later, you wrote an explanation of these words for your friend.
Well, I think I have that somewhere because it's on the back of, I can read those words out to you and then I'll explain. Just a second. Huh? Those words are on the back of this essay collection, right? And it says to love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair, to never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple, to respect strength, never power, above all to watch, to try and understand, to never look away and never, never to forget. So I think, it's something that perhaps for me is, even more important now in the midst of a pandemic, to never forget that we have to live while we're alive. You know, we cannot be entombed. We cannot be, we mustn't allow our minds to be caged in fear. We have to find a way to deal with what is being done to us, even if it is while we are locked down, whatever it is. You know, we have to, we can't be passive participants in this pandemic, because it's our lives, it's our societies, it's our everything, you know. And there's a certain humiliation that is going on right now, a humiliation of what information we are being given. There's a humiliation of the fact that all decision making is out of our hands. You know, there's a humiliation in the pleasure of these authoritarian governments, like for Modi to come out and say to a country of 1.2 billion people, to come out one day and say, this country will be locked down in 4 hours. It's a humiliation, you know. No preparation, doesn't matter where you come from. Do you have food? Do you not? Do you have medicines? Do you have rent? Have you gone for a wedding to the next town and you can't get back? It's just unbelievable, you know, that is this the way you treat people who are already undergoing a tragedy? And now what I worry about is that we don't even understand when we are being humiliated. You know, we are so frightened that we don't even understand when we are being humiliated or manipulated or hated.
Arundhati, if you were asked by people from elsewhere, from other parts of the world, how to bring help to India now, what would be your answer? What would be your advice?
It would be that, first of all, there is a lot of help coming, but that help then is immediately channeled into these hate machines that rule us. And therefore, it helps them even more, you know. So I would say that right now, there needs to be a system where people, politicians who belong to opposition parties, who rule various states, scientists, virologists, doctors, and the ruling party there should be a kind of committee which is not anti-science, you know, and the help should be channeled through that. It cannot just be these, somewhere between corporatism and quackery, and nothing in between is where we live right now, you know. So the help, like all help, you know, it isn't help unless it's thought out, unless, you know, just throwing money at people and feeling good about yourself, throwing vaccines at people, it doesn't help, you know. It needs to be followed through in some way, and followed through not because I'm asking for people to control India, but that the people who do understand that this needs to work as a democracy, that help should invigorate that democracy, not help these nationalists who are really fascists.
Arundhati, thank you for sharing your thoughts and touching stories. I hope that the message you send to the world, the message you are sending to the world, will be heard and changes will be done. Let me give one short information to our viewers. Next month, I'm going to interview Katarzyna Kalwat, a theater director. We will talk about oppressive social hierarchies, institutional hierarchies. The conversation will be presented on the last Thursday of July. So please, dear readers, remember this date and be with us, be with Conrad Festival. Arundhati, once again, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you. It was my pleasure.